All right, in this demonstration, I'm going to show you how you can use Photoshop to create 3D effects. So what we're going to be doing is creating an extruded production company, fake production company sign, and it's going to look something like this. So it'll look something like this. It doesn't have to look exactly like this, but it'll look sort of something like this. Okay. So to get started, first thing that you would want to do is go ahead and, if you're going to follow this demonstration, you can either use the exact files that I'm using, which are going to be available on the server, so you can download those, or you can use your own files if you want to kind of follow along and make your own thing. But what I'm going to do is create this master folder for the project, so I'm calling it 3D Photoshop Demo. You can call it whatever you want. And then my resource files are going to be some things in here. And I may not use all of these, but it gives me some options so that I have some textures that I can use. This is a Hedgehog, but I'm not doing it for the Hedgehog. I'm doing it for the clover background. And then there's this crown because we're doing something with majestic productions, and that's something I may or may not use. This is something I might use to map as a painted rusted texture to the steel typography, and maybe that'll get used. I don't know, but it gives me some options. All right, and the reason that it's important to keep these resource files inside your master folder is because that way you'll always have access to them in case you need to change something, or if you decide to not embed your links, but maybe instead you decide to use regular links so that the originals are going to stay original. Anyway, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to jump into Photoshop, and the first thing you're going to notice is that this doesn't perhaps look like the standard or traditional basic workspace. So if you were to go up to Window and go to Workspace, you could choose 3D, and that's what I'm going to recommend that you do first off the bat. Something else too that you might want to check is in your preferences. I'm on a Mac, so I'm going up here to where it says Photoshop CC. If you're on Windows, you would go to Edit Preferences. But anyway, Photoshop CC on a Mac, then Preferences. And then if you go down to 3D, you want to use probably as much of the VRAM available on your computer as possible. It just depends, if you're running a whole bunch of other stuff, then you might not want to do that. But this also tells you where you can adjust your ray tracer qualities so that if you decide, whenever you want to render your stuff, it can use more or less of your resources. Okay, I'm going to leave mine where it is though. All right, so I'm going to make a new file first off, and I'm going to use these properties of 1280 pixels by 720 pixels, and then I'll leave it at a 72 resolution because this is only ever going to be for screen production on mine. But if you were going to, say, use this as a print production thing, you'd probably need to bump it up to something like 300 ppi. And then I'll leave mine as RGB, and white is fine for my background. It's really up to you if you need it to be transparent. And if you decide, by the way, that you want to save this out as a transparent PNG so that you can have maybe a movie, clip playing behind it or something, then you might want to go ahead and change yours to transparent. I'm just going to leave mine as white. Okay, so first things first, let's go ahead and start importing some of those textures and some of the other images. So I'll go up here to File, and first of all, I should save it. Let's just go ahead and save the file. So I'll hit Save As, and then I'm going to save it in this Photoshop Demo folder. I'm not going to put it in resource files. I'm just going to save it in the master Photoshop 3D Photoshop Demo folder. So I'll call this 3D Demo. And now it's going to know the pathway whenever I go to find the file. So if I go over here and I say File, and I choose, I can choose either Place Embedded or Place Linked. If I place Embedded, then it's going to make the file size larger for this native PSD file, but that way it'll prevent me from having to always carry those resources around. Place Linked means that it will always keep the link to the original, and so that if you were to go and update the original, for instance, then it would also update it in this file. For now, I'm going to place Embedded because it's less likely to have, well, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to place Embedded. And if you think that you are a little bit concerned about, your ability to always keep track of your files for some reason, then you might want to do place embedded. But I'm going to strongly suggest that you always keep track of these files. So first things first, I'll go ahead and start importing. I'll do the crown, and you see that it's got a lot of detail in here. I'm going to have to like get some of that detail out of there to make it easier to trace. Now, you could find a different picture of a crown. You can go on the web and find some clip art that has a lot fewer bumps and ridges, and that's going to make it a lot easier for the path to render. So it's really up to you if you want to do that. But the idea is that this thing is going to end up being kind of sort of, you know, not majestic. That's the idea, is that it's going to be sort of an ironic, old, deteriorated sign. So it's okay if it doesn't look 100%. Now, if I want to scale this down, it's asking me where do I want to place it and how big. So I'm going to click and hold this corner, and then if I hold down Option, that's going to constrain it from the center, and if I hold down Shift, it'll constrain the proportions so that they don't get resized in a weird way. And I know that my crown is going to probably need to be somewhere in the ballpark of about maybe that big. So I'll lift up off my mouse. Now I can lift off my other keys, and I hit Return, and it places it there for me, and I know that it's dead center, which is really nice. Now, the other thing that I know I'm eventually going to want to do is I know that I'm going to need to rasterize every single one of my layers because of the kinds of 3D things that I'm doing to them. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. So over here in my layers panel, right, if I right click the crown layer and then I go down and I find where it says rasterize layer, it turns it into a raster layer, and it gets rid of that little box down in the left corner that tells me that it's a smart object. I can't modify smart objects destructively, so it means that I can't like delete pixels, for instance. I can mask them, but I can't actually delete them. So I'm going to go ahead and rasterize this, and I'm just also going to move it down a little bit. So I'm going to use my move tool over here in the in the tool panel. And if I hold down Shift as I move it, it's going to constrain it. So I can put it somewhere in here. I can also use my nudge keys while the move tool is selected. All right, so that's good. Now I'm going to go ahead and import my other stuff. And you have to do these one at a time. You can't do them multiply because, you know, it wants you to place them and position them individually. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start in the top left corner, and I'm going to scale this out. And you can either, it's up to you, you can either scale this out so that it keeps its proportion. If I hold down Shift, you see what it does, but I don't need it to be bigger than the actual image. So I'm going to just scale it disproportionately since it's just a texture, and I know that it's going to look okay because it's a very high resolution image. So I'll hit Enter. Now, one thing that I do notice is it's got this weird white spot over here. So if I take my magnification tool to blow that up, I can get rid of that, and I can go over here for my clone stamp. All right, or I could also just grab my spot healing brush tool, and you see it's telling me I can't use it. Now that's because it's a smart object over here. See how it's got this little page icon down here? It won't let me destructively make modifications to that. So I'm going to go ahead and rasterize mine. I'm going to right click it and come down and say rasterize layer, because I'm still going to have to do that to do some 3D stuff to it anyway. And now you see it'll let me actually just use my spot healing tool right on it. And I can maybe any other big white bright spots, if they seem like they really stick out in an odd way, I can get rid of those as well. Okay, so that looks pretty good to me. And then I'm going to go ahead and zoom back out. And then the next thing that I'm going to do is import another texture. So I'll say place embedded again. And I'm going to choose this time this painted rusty wall. So I'll hit place. And again, I'm going to do the same thing. This time, because the texture is, it looks pretty well formed, I actually don't think that I want to distort it, because then it might end up looking kind of strange. I mean, it might look all right, but I think that I want to keep it in its original form so that it doesn't get pixelated or anything at all. It's really up to you. Actually, I don't know, maybe it'll be okay. Let's just try that and see how that looks. And I'll go ahead and hit Enter. And again, I need to rasterize this. So let's go ahead and rasterize it. And lastly, I need to bring in the hedgehog picture, which is I'm not going to use immediately, but let's just go ahead and get it in there. And there's hedgehog. And you see our little hedgehog. And this is one where I can make a decision whether or not I want it to be. This one I do want to hold down shift. I don't want this one getting distorted at all. All right, and so I can come and make it about that big, and then I can move it around so that it's, you know, maybe at the bottom here somewhere. Okay, and then I want to take the hedgehog. I'm not going to rasterize it yet. I'm going to take the hedgehog and move it down so it's not on top of everything, because we're going to use that later. Okay, so now we've got all of our stuff in here. And I'm going to go ahead and save this and make sure that everything is saved. Okay, so now that I've got all these things in here, the one thing that I am really missing still is the text. All right, so, and I'm also going to put this crown on top of everything so that we can see it. And I'm also going to put this dark rusted steel layer on top, because ultimately that's going to be kind of the background, if you remember back from the original image that I showed you. And then this painted rusty wall image, that's going to get mapped as a texture onto the front face of the extruded sort of sign stamp letters. Okay, so we have the crown, and one of the things that's going to have to happen, so we may as well just take care of it now, and then I'll make the text, is that we're going to have to get rid of all this white that's in there. So I'm going to blow this up a little bit, and I'm going to use my magic wand tool over here, and if it's showing the quick selection tool, just click and hold it and you'll find magic wand underneath. And if you just click on the white, because this is just black and white, it's going to be really easy to get rid of what's not black. So I'm just going to actually hit delete. Because I've rasterized the layer, it will actually destructively remove those pixels, which is exactly what I want. If you have not rasterized it, it might tell you that you can't do that. So make sure you have rasterized any layer that you're going to actually delete pixels from, or use like the eraser tool, or, you know, destructively change. Okay, so now I'm also going to choose these interior white spaces, and I'll hold down the shift key to select multiple sections of that. I'll hit delete again. And for deselect, I'll do Command D or Control D on Windows. And then if you look at this, there's a lot of detail in here that, you know, I really don't need to have, because if you remember, this is going to be a steel extrusion. So let's just blow this up, and I'm going to paint some black pixels in there. So if you don't have down here in your bottom left corner, if you don't have the foreground color set to black, you can just click on this little button right here. And I'm going to take my paintbrush tool, which is right here. All right. And you might want to set the brush size, I don't know, somewhere around maybe 27. Turn the hardness all the way up. If you are trying to get rid of something, you know, kind of like this, where the pixels are really ones that, you know, you don't want to have soft edges, and I don't want to have soft edges on something that I'm going to extrude out as hard steel. And I'm going to go ahead also and get rid of this section, all right, because I want the pathway to be a little bit simpler. And the other thing that I can do too is, you've got these little knobs off to the side. I'm going to select my eraser tool, and the brush right now is gigantic, so let's turn it down some. Let's turn it down even more. And again, if you keep the hardness turned up. Oh, and for some reason I've got the opacity turned down on that brush, so I'm going to turn that all the way up. And let's just get rid of that little knob on the side here, and then also on this side as well. And then I'll get rid of this knob that's kind of sticking out also. It's a nice detail, but it makes the path a little bit more complex. And then, you know, depending on what the complexity level is, that it's able to do on your computer, you might also have to like sort of clean up some of these other edges as well, or just use a different picture. You know, it's really up to you. You know, you could come in here and clean some of this up. Let's just do that. And we can see kind of how it looks. So your crown might end up looking a little bit different depending on what you do. Anyway, I think that's probably going to be okay. And then we've got this crown, and that's at 100%. And so we're good there. I'm going to save it. All right, and in the next video, I'm going to show you how you can add text and a border so that we can set this up for extrusion.